programme, having defined what your programme is, it is this series of one or more audits, and within that audit programme then you need to have everything lined up. So how are you going to plan it? What is your process for planning? How often are you planning? Is it a once a year process? Is it once a quarter? How big is your organisation? How many audits are you going to need to do? How many auditors have you got? One of the groups at least had reduction in number of auditors as being an issue. So, you know, what have you got? What are your resources to be able to plan your audits, and how are you going to organise that? So that whole process of planning is really important, and there should be a process in place that says how you're going to do it. The scale of what you're doing, the number of audits that you're doing, the number of programmes that you're going to have will depend on your organisations. So you're all different, you're all coming from different groups, different companies, different trusts, different universities. So what you need to do will be different from the person you're sitting next to. But it needs to be fit for your purpose. And I'll go back to something I said earlier this morning about justification. So being able to justify your decisions and decide why you're doing what you're doing is really important. I will say at this point, we've talked a little bit about resources, that saying that you don't have the resources, if you're working in the regulated arena, so under GCP or GLP, and saying that you don't have the resources is not an excuse. Okay? So you do not want to stand in front of a regulatory inspector and say we didn't do that because we haven't got the staff. Okay, that is not acceptable. If you are playing in these arenas, then your management needs to be committed to it, and they need to provide the resources in order to comply with the legislation. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so what you do though, and the risks that you assess will help you design your programme. It will vary from organisation to organisation, but what it's trying to achieve is to monitor compliance of your activities against your standards, your quality standards. So it's going to schedule to cover the breadth of all the activities that are happening in a regular manner. So we would expect to see a schedule that has audits, depending on your organisation, every week, every month, every quarter, once a year, depends who you are, what you're doing, but it does need to be regular, and it needs to cover the breadth of the activity. So it needs to set out to attempt to cover all of the different things that you're doing. So going back to my scenario with clinics and labs, the fact that you've got two programmes covering the clinical side, the clinical sites, and the laboratory sites is indicating that you're trying to cover all the breadth of the activities that your organisation is involved in. If you're also manufacturing, then I would expect to see a GMP audit programme in there as well. Okay. So each programme is going to include one or more audits, and that will depend on how complex you are and the activities you're undertaking. And the individual audit objectives, the reason I put on those forms about organisational objectives is because all the time you should be thinking about why you're doing it. You know, what are we trying to do here? Am I auditing something? Am I looking at things? Am I writing SOPs about things that are not part of what we're trying to do? So always bringing things back to what are we trying to do? That keeping it simple, keeping it streamlined. What are we setting out to do? What are we proving that we're compliant with? So don't get sidetracked and audit things that are not appropriate. Keep it aligned with the objectives of what your organisation is trying to do and what your quality management system is setting out to achieve.